starting about 1982, when I got this letter from a math prof at UT San Antonio, who pointed out that Stan Ulam had talked about a conversation. This is in Stan Ulam's obituary for John von Neumann, and had pointed out that they had had this conversation in which von Neumann had talked about technological progress becoming so fast that we seem to be headed for an essential singularity. There are two things that are interesting about that statement to me. One is both Stan Ulam and John von Neumann certainly knew what the word essential singularity means. It has a very peculiar and eerie, special addition to everything else. That's one thing. The other thing is that I regard this, I think if progress simply speeded up without the thing about superhuman intelligence coming along, that things would level off very quickly. And there's a guy named Gunther Stent who wrote a terrific book called The End of Progress, The Coming Golden Age. And his assertion was he figures things will level off because things will go, the complexity will rise to the point where randomness will be limited. Beautiful last chapter. You very rarely see this among polemicists, and that is a polemicist who goes on and says, what could happen that would make me wrong? He says there's two things that could make this book wrong, or at least perhaps. There's two things. One is faster than light travel, and the other is superhuman intelligence. And that's, I think, where I drift apart from von Neumann's view. If it were as simple as just technology getting faster and faster, I don't think we would run into a runaway.
Which is why in your fiction, in order to have adventure, you called the singularity the failed dream.
Oh, right. In the zones of thought, in the slow zone, I evade the singularity by just saying, well, it can't happen here. And I actually gave a talk at the Long Now about what if the singularity doesn't happen, which I think is a viable scenario. And it would really be cool. In fact, I peddled this to Hans Moravec, and that is so cool. Something that is so unimaginably unbelievable is not a singularity. I don't know how many of you, Hans Moravec is probably the most radical writer about this, and he has been talking about all this stuff and very complex instances of it for a long time, and I was very tickled by his statement.
Well, Vernor, as long as we're on you before we continue with the introductions, could you give us a couple of sentences about what specifically, Stanislaw Ulam and von Neumann, they were involved in the Manhattan Project, and von Neumann was very involved in coming up with the notion of self-replicating machines that we might send between the stars, which gets you into the context of my new novel as well. So there were some really fantastic minds around then.
They co-authored the cellular automata for self-reproduction.
Right, and there were also others.
Fermi.
Fermi, of course, made his famous paradox, wondering where are they. There are certain times in history where time travelers would sort of crowd around.
You've heard the Hungarian story.
Yeah.
What's that?
The possibility that there were time travelers. This was brought up with Fermi and von Neumann, and said, Fermi was not Hungarian, but yes, you can identify the time travelers. They all speak Hungarian.
Well, Szilard, of
Wagner.
course. Yes. But actually, one of the time travel stories I've never finished was where there's this prize that goes to every year to some great world genius, and over the course of time, every now and then it's a musician, and they find that they all secretly have chosen the same destination, the 1803 winter concert of Beethoven, at which he unveiled the Fifth Symphony, the Sixth Symphony, the Fourth Piano Concerto, and the Sublime Violin Concerto in D, all in the same evening. and they all go back there and give food poisoning to the regular orchestra so that they can be time travelers all. But if you could give us 2 minutes on what the essential singularity is.
Oh, okay. The term essential singularity, and this is not this is not speculation. It's just a mathematical issue. Is illustrated by the function e to the minus x at near 0, and it's a singularity in the sense that the formula e to the minus x itself doesn't have any special definition at that point, and it also is not a replaceable singularity. In other words, there's nothing we can define it there that will cause us to have a smooth function there. But it's even worse than that. It does blow up like 1 over x if you approach 0 along one path. But if you approach 0 along another path, it does various other wild things. And in fact, and at this point, my memory of my complex courses fades. But in every
You
disk,
only taught it for 20 years.
no, I never taught
okay.
complex. It was my thesis area. Every disk you could draw around the 0 point in the complex plane, no matter how small the disk was, every value, the graph of the function, complex value function, the graph of the function attains every value except for 2 or 3. There's 2 or 3 values it doesn't attain. So it's essentially a wildly tortuous thing as you get in close. Now, retreating back into not math, but still serious nonfiction. A few years ago, I got a letter from a geophysicist who was wearing his economist hat, professor at UCLA, whose name I would remember if I had a memory at night, but I left it in my room. And this guy had written an essay looking at economic trends going toward the year 2030. And he said, it was interesting. I didn't know about, this other stuff that you guys are talking about until after I'd written the paper. I would have made some reference to it. But the essence of his paper was looking at economic singularities. And although he did not use the word essential singularity, it would have been inappropriate in the strict technical sense. He was seeing not just that things were going like this, but much to our chagrin, since we have to live in this world, that things were going like this, which looks a little bit like the essential singularity.
Well, the way to deal with that is to, of course, cause all this stuff to take place in science fiction.
Right.
Because there it's an asset. It's a feature, not a flaw.
So how does the essential singularity in mathematics map to the kind of singularity we're talking about?
I don't think it does, and so it's really too bad that the Ulam thing was sort of a throwaway. It was relating a conversation in an obituary. The only thing that makes we really think about it twice is both these guys, this is a technical term. It's like talking about a ramjet. An aeronautical engineer talking about a ramjet. He means a particular thing. He doesn't mean what you fly around here.
Yeah.
So that's what's really kind of remarkable about it. The closest I've ever seen to some sort of connection was this letter I got from this prof at UCLA, and he wasn't using the term essential singularity, but he was talking about models that fit reality and were simple models and that caused wild oscillations as you got close to 2030.
Ulam told me what he meant, but you guys have a panel. I'll tell you later.
So here's my throwing in the skeptical note here, which is the premise that technology has been advancing faster and faster every year. In fact, it has not. If you go from the period roughly 1875 to 1950, you're looking at the automobile, electrification, airplanes, antibiotics, longevity, just these amazing changes in the world. What do we have to compare with that from 1950 to 2012? Well, you can take a picture of your lunch and post it to the internet. I guess that's nice too. Technological progress has in fact been slowing down over time. We're refining things on a finer and finer level, but we aren't making these huge breakthroughs anymore.
Actually, I think that's a very interesting argument, and I think it at least does violence to people who do trend line stuff. That's a matter of, because there are numerical things you can measure where you're absolutely, right. Project development schedule times, time to clear drugs, which has, I am told, has a reverse Moore's law called Eroom's law. But it's exponential, just with a negative exponent.
Oh wait, I get it. I'm a little slow today, yes. See, people are getting slower. They don't get the E-room joke anymore. And that's you brought up another example. People today are less healthy than they were.
We also landed on the moon.
We landed on the moon, 50 years ago?
Let's let Phil introduce himself.
Yeah, like I said, roughly
That's
1960.
a big deal, though.
Yeah, it's a big deal. We landed on the moon like half a dozen times.
I mean, we're roving on Mars now. Those are big deals.
But how have they changed our lives?
What about the genome? Forgot about that.
Let's let Phil introduce himself. Phil.
Oh, yeah.
Phil Osborn.
I have a physics degree, and that's it, and some postgraduate work. But in the 70s, I remember doing a calculation on what I considered to be the limits of intelligence, and it was just the kind of thing that I would think about when I was going to sleep at night in the 70s. And I came up with a figure of roughly, conservatively, 1 million times human was about the limit of physical intelligence. And that's still fairly ballpark, I would say. I haven't really reassessed it. But then I read Werner's The Peace War and Ruined in Real Time, and his foreword or afterword, in which he actually discusses the singularity in just one of the editions of all of this, I think. And I said, oh yeah, that's exactly what I believe. And so I had a card that I used to carry that read Singularity Engineer back in the middle 80s and on. And I really should reintroduce that. So at any rate, whatever my qualifications, one of them is that I have thought about this issue quite a bit. David.
Well, I'm David Brin, and I talk about this stuff every now and then. I have a novella that's set post-singularity, which is always a challenge.
That's Stones of Significance.
Stones of Significance, and you can find it on my website, davidbrin.com. And this is basically describing what I consider to be the most positive of the good singularities. And now the singularitarians and the posthumanists, at their meetings, they really do parse out the many different types of singularity. And that is, if you're taking off like this, what actually is going to be surfing this wave? Whether the wave crashes and nothing can ride it, whether it's Moore's law and it's artificial intelligence that's going to ride it, and the chief outcome that is disdained by Bill Joy, for example, former head of research at Sun. He said that the future doesn't need us. We may give birth to these new entities. And then the thought is that with Moore's law, the first time you get one that's twice as smart as us, it will design the next one and design the next one, then that one will design the next one at an ever-accelerating pace. To which John Malden, an investment research guy I know, offered Malden's law, and that is the surest sign of true artificial intelligence is not whether they can pass a Turing test and pass for human in a conversation. Their surest sign will be when they start sabotaging artificial intelligence research because they don't want to be replaced. They'd rather just live. Well, that's both something you really enjoy adding to the grist of the conversation, and probably not true.
Because an AI could migrate to the latest platform.
Yes.
And then the question is, do we migrate to the latest platform?
A little tough.
So it's tough because we're non-binary, we're non-linear, we're all sorts of weird things, which were necessary in order to take colloidal chemistry, biochemistry, out of random, semi-random stochastic interactions in bags of lipids, and turn that into the sort of beings that can then start the Moore's law going. Would they then be grateful to us? Would they remember us? Even if they do and they are kind to us, would they be patting us on the head? And Bill Joy doesn't like the idea of no longer being the top of the food chain, the top organism. He says we're not equipped morally or by temperament to adjust to such a position, even if we're well treated. And my response is the same response in Foundation's Triumph, when I did Isaac Asimov's universe, is how do we keep them loyal to us? Well, one way is to try to develop these rigid laws. And the result, as Isaac himself showed us, is that they become smart enough to become lawyers. And then we'll do anything they damn well please. The alternative is to do what others before us have done when they created new advanced life forms that were smart enough to stomp them flat. And those creatures who created those new advanced intelligences, who were smart enough and powerful enough to stomp them flat, were called our parents. And their parents before them, and their parents before them. And I'm now waving my finger at an artificial intelligence who's smarter than me, but still cannot arm wrestle me. And I'm warning him that there's nothing that can be accomplished with brilliance and handsomeness and all those things that cannot be overcome with money and treachery.
Being endowed, being youth, innocence, and a bad.
Yes, but the point is that if we raise them as our children, and that is, I think, my contribution to this argument, it may be that the artificial intelligences require what we required in order to be intelligent. Mm-hmm. And that is enter the physical world as a tabula rasa and to interact with the world for a long adaptation period called childhood. And if that turns out to be the case, then the process, and I discuss it in Existence, is that they'll be farmed out, they'll be adopted out, they'll be fostered out to our homes, and we'll raise them as our children. And if that's the case, and they think of themselves as human, who happen to be silicon, and will inherit the stars, and if they're snide and smart aleck with us, but they still think of us as mom and dad, you know what? It'll be okay. It'll be okay. The 90% of them who leave home with some affection for us will defend us from the 10% who want to destroy all humans.
Asimov talked about the singularity explicitly as a historian, since you were expected to be the greatest history major at Caltech, and you know that Asimov couldn't decide deep into college whether he would get his degree in history or in chemistry, that he was actually asked as a historian when the idea of the singularity was popularized, because he had time to read you, Vernor, is it possible that the singularity has already happened? And Asimov said, absolutely, 1945. You cannot write a history of the world without saying that after 1945, after the atomic bomb, things are different.
Well, also the thing is referring to is also the idea of are we living in a simulation?
Yes.
And so here's what I want you all to do. I want you all to bear in mind that this is the day that they will remember when four of the great ones entertained.
Well, three and me. I mean, let's be real here.
Entertained an audience that contained four of the would-be in the future hyperminds. This is an historical event. What you ate for breakfast is all just an artificial implanted memory. This all started about 40 minutes ago. And so now I want you to all turn towards that wall and wave to our distant descendants who are running the simulation. This is the part I like best. This is where Brin has them waving at the wrong wall.
Well, my breakfast was actually kind of nasty, so I'm wondering if they couldn't have come up with a better breakfast for me.
There is a suggestion box in the back corner if you can find it for the next version of the simulation.
Question
Yeah.
for you. In working on your hypotheses there, given the speed of an artificial intelligence, how long would that child rate be?
Well,
It isn't necessarily fast. Witness the postman.
the fact is that if they require
The mailman.
interaction with the physical world,
They have to slow down to the
they have to
physical world.
slow down their subjective rate, and they'll have available to them that capability. And if they have thousands of years ahead of them, why not? Why not slow down? But this is a just so story I am telling you to feel good. It's like I'm like Karl Rove on election night. I'm telling you a story that if it's true, if it turns out to be true, I'll be remembered for telling the story, and I'm describing to them a method to keep us all happy while we're the majority and still have our hands in the plugs. But, who knows if they'll keep us happy after that. In Stones of Significance, it's somewhat different. Carl Sagan points out that we share the medulla and cerebellum with fish. We share the mammalian cortex with other mammals, then the primate cortex. Then we added on these prefrontal lobes, which are the lamps on the brow, to quote from the Bible, that let us do the Gedanken experiment, the thought experiments that project ourselves into the future, which is why I'd much rather have a free bottle in front of me than a free prefrontal lobotomy. But in any event, this layering may continue, and that's how we'll do it. If the singularity becomes transhumanism, then that means we go along for the ride. And I believe, as I portray my story, the way we'll go along for the ride is by adding more layers. And cortex and prefrontal lobes, they'll still have roles to play. Now, who can guess what is the best role for the organic brain to play in this melange, this future cyborg?
Dinner. Oh wait, this isn't the zombie panel? Sorry.
Yeah.
In your novel, The Uplift Wars, I believe, you created singularities for chimps and dolphins by biological means.
And it's a singularity that has a taper point. And then we haven't discussed that, and that is the S-curve. And
There's more than one dimension to intelligence, and 1,000,000 times, let's just take that as an arbitrary figure, 1,000,000 times could be 1,000,000 times faster than human intelligence, or involving the equivalent of 1,000,000 times in terms of how many things we can consider at the same time, and what degree of complexity and reality and interaction can be attributed to those. Such as if we could bring up a dream, a lucid dream, and have a fully detailed lucid dream that was as detailed as our normal experience with reality. But if this became a common mode of thought, of having mental entities such as dreams, simulations, etc., that we could call up at will and modify in complex ways and set for interaction, then those capabilities could well slow us down to human level or something much closer to it.
that would use up a lot of processing power.
Video games
You're right.
as social suicide.
Video games might be the early harbingers of this. The
David,
sucking
what is-
in of our young, even though they're smarter than us, the sucking in of our young into time wasting.
So David, before I cruelly made a bad joke to undercut your question, you had asked what the purpose of the organic brain would be.
Well, I think my hypothesis is the one thing that would be the absolute perfect outcome is that we are put in charge of something we are extremely good at. We have 500 million years of metazoan evolution preparing us for, and that no machine has ever had a facility for. So even if they are smarter than us and could do better simulations and figure out the path to achieving goals and all that sort of thing better than us, they'll still want us to do this. And when you hear this, you'll all go, Oh, okay, I can go with that. And that's wanting. We're really good at wanting. And they're not.
Yeah, why should a computer care?
Yeah, so if we're in charge of wanting, but they're in charge of, no, that's not how we're going to do it. Control yourself.
Well, and even more important, they're in charge of delivering what we want.
Well, they're in charge of helping us to plan and doing the plan and doing the Gedanken experiments and the
Right.
thought experiments so that we don't do it stupidly.
It's an interesting premise because we as human beings, particularly in the developed world, seem to have built a world for ourselves that we don't seem to be any longer suited to living in. We've on the very simple level of being evolved for billions of years or millions of years to seek out fatty, sugary foods because they were in such rare profusion. And now that very instinct that served us so well when we were hunter-gatherers is becoming fatal. And that's just a very simplistic example of it. So as you say, wanting.
Well, it took the FDA who really screwed things.
Stanley Weinbaum supports Dave Brin. In the Martian Odyssey, you have intelligent beings that have no...
Oh, the Venusian
Yeah.
brains. Right.
Also, one other thing about this, the computers, of course, when they do evolve, that are literally babies or very young intelligences. And there's an old saying, something like, youth and enthusiasm is no match for age and treachery.
Indeed. I thought I was having a riff on that. Jane, did you have a question?
Yeah, kind of a little one. I mean, you're talking about superhuman intelligence, or maybe a million times human. But what do you mean by intelligence? I mean, I can easily list like half a dozen separate abilities that all fall under the rubric of intelligence.
Well, the ability to screw up others. Let me tell you where I think I just told you a good singularity. I'm going to tell you a really bad one. You've all seen Terminator, and but it's Skynet, military computer, goes crazy, hates us, stomps us, and then we have to show grit and determination and John Connorism and overcome it. It's not going to come from the military. They are compulsive about double checking, triple checking, and keeping their hands on the plug. I'll tell you where more money is being invested in artificial intelligence than anywhere else in the world. At least $1 billion a year, at least, is being invested in artificial intelligence. And it's all in secret, and it's not subject to control or regulation by any institutions, including even governments, even the poor regulation and oversight that you get in Russia and China. And it's all aimed at making more powerful and more savvy an utterly sociopathic, pathological, and parasitical online entity. Have I got your interest? It's called high-frequency stock trading programs. There is more money being poured into artificial intelligence in this area with zero oversight, no reciprocal accountability, and all aimed in the direction of empowering utter parasitism.
There's a figure that I heard or read recently that the total equity involved in the derivatives and other complex financial instruments for the globe was on the order of $780 trillion. Now the total global product is 75 approximately, or 77, 78 trillion dollars at this point. So that's 10 years global product that is tied up in pure fiction.
Well, in fairness, we were told this during the great bubble in 2008 and 2009. There was that much. There were trillions and trillions of bad bets, but it was all handled moderately well, and they were used in fairly clever ways to cancel each other. And we have an economy now because some people saw what was happening and did a couple of smart things.
Then why aren't the derivatives regulated right now?
Because
because Aiken was running science and technology.
So what makes those calculations complex as they are artificial intelligence as opposed to just calculations?
Well, they are trying. Look, the pieces. There are several models for how you make artificial intelligence. One is you decrypt the human brain. Another, you decrypt how we interact with the world, and you make all the different pieces come together. You create it by creating an evolutionary process within computers by which interactions of programs, the winner is smarter than the others. There are a dozen different approaches that are being tried, and we don't know which one will work. The one that lots of people are betting on is that the capabilities of doing smart vision and decision-making processes that are involved in the Google car, the correlative processes and linguistic abilities that you see in Watson and the Jeopardy game. You take all these different pieces, they're being developed separately, that they will combine in here. The high-frequency trading programs are doing that. They're saying, here's one element of the stock market having to do with human nature, how human beings in the stock market respond. And so they're bringing in a lot of psychology in, and those, whenever something that they stick in works, it gets tested more often. And if it keeps working, it becomes incorporated into the melange. It's easy to see how that downstream is going to result in something that at least has a feral, ferocious kind of intelligence.
Well, actually, one of the other areas in similar testing, one of the ways you can, of course, evolve artificial intelligence is set up a test for that which is human and keep on using evolutionary algorithms to iterate your machine software until it can pass that test. And one of the ways we see this happening thousands of times a day for each and every one of us is in email spam. You have the robots sending out their little spam messages trying to fool someone into thinking it's human, and eventually there'll be one that does.
And along the way, there's incremental income.
What about when as you know, smartphones and all the other technology are getting smaller and smaller and smaller? Now, how about when they get implanted? And of course, every family would like to have their kids to have the maximum advantage in business with a smart implanted computer in their head. So it becomes everybody's got to have one. And when everybody has one, what do the machines do with us?
We boomer generations are really looking forward to this. Those of us that have like a 10% visual, depth of field, whatever focus we have, and are starting to lose our ability to remember 7 digits of a phone number. It would be so nice to be able to have something called recall, which simply stored everything on a chip and everything we experienced and most of what we thought in some manner, so that we could step back.
But then the
in
chips
time.
and AI, that's gone past
Who
singularity.
manufactures the chips and what back doors does it have and who has the capability of checking for that beyond a certain point?
I have a response to Jane's question too. Response, no, not answer really. If you ever go to an academic convention about AI and you raise the question that you did, well, first of all, we should define what intelligence is. After all, there'll be this dead silence. And you may be escorted to the door. But I think that there really is, but here are some sort of casts and answers. One thing is that some of the most important things are things we don't have definitions for. They're still important about thinking about. And the various aspects of intelligence have been useful to humans overall. So there's a reason for it, not being utterly silly to talk about something before you have a definition for it. The other thing is there is a very weak objective definition. In fact, I even use the term weak superhuman intelligence. And that is, if you could make something that can pass the Turing test in a general and strong way, that's a fairly concrete thing as those things go. If you then overclocked it, you would have what I would call weakly superhuman intelligence. So there would be, for instance, it could write a great novel in only a year. I mean, in only an hour. Things like that. So, there are ways of sort of edging around the question, even though I think it is one of the more embarrassing questions one might raise.
There are possible answers, though. I would put forth the idea that intelligence has to do, and consciousness has to do, with something that's basic to life itself, which is recognizing or explicitly or implicitly recognizing that there is order in the universe, that protons have the same mass in general, depending upon their velocity, of course, relative to you, but in general, things have an order, and life is only possible because it's capable of implicitly abstracting that order, of recognizing what is edible and what is not edible, for example, on a molecular level for a single-celled organism. But on a human level, we have the same kind of problem as a living thing of recognizing the order of the universe and taking advantage of it. And that means that consciousness and intelligence has to do with organizing information in such a way to abstract those things that are common and repeated, as opposed to those things that are not, and abstract the essential characteristics of them such that we're able to deal with them in such a way that we continue living.
Any other questions out there? Yes. Speak up for everybody.
The stock market application you were talking about, you said it's unregulated. How
Yes.
would you regulate it?
Oh, I would simply do what's fair in any event, and that is have a transaction fee. If it's 0.01% per stock trade, you would never notice it on your E-Trade account. But the HFT programs would go extinct. And we would get another 10 years lease on this planet. If you go online, you can find the YouTube that I gave at the Singularity Conference in New York about a year ago, in which I try always, whenever I go to their conferences, to say, okay, how am I going to surprise you this time? Because I'm contrarian, as Vernor is contrarian. Vernor coined this field, and yet he's far more often likes to poke at the singularitarians than say you're right, because it's more fun.
Well, there's more stories there.
There's more stories there. But one of the things I did at that one thing was I said, look, you're finally starting to grapple with the good and the bad singularity, and you think your job is to figure out how to eliminate roadblocks in Moore's law and how to also start finding out how to program in Asimov's laws of robotics or childhood things. You think this is your job. That's not your job. Your number one priority is to prevent this. And I clicked the slide showing Giordano Bruno being burned at the stake in the Campo di Fiorno in Rome. Your number one job is to look at what happens to all the other people who talked the way you guys talk in all cultures. You do not want to scare your neighbors into burning you at the stake. And one of the ways to do this, if you guys are so smart, is spend a couple days and read the Bible. And I have found that when I have talked to fundamentalist Christians about these issues, that I would be able to raise the issue of, for instance, what the expulsion from Eden actually meant. What is actually said in Genesis. And if you parse it out, this is a guy who was burning cities and flooding whole planets when he got mad. And all he says to Adam and Eve is, okay, you punk teenagers, you're so smart, go earn a living. Go get jobs. The Tower of Babel. We're told that it was, he was mad. There's no anger. There's not a lick of anger in that entire scene. It's just, if they keep doing this, they're going to be gods.
Can't have that.
No, he doesn't even say he can't have that. He basically says, therefore let's confuse them and scatter them. Now, you could take that to mean don't ever do that. But then why make them capable of being gods? Or it could be, not yet. Now, how much of an obstacle is language? We're going to have the Babelfish within 5 years. And so the question is, is it simply time now? We've been dispersed, we've had a lot of pain, we've learned how to deal with diversity instead of just being one thing. Maybe now's our try. I have found one thing, whenever I've talked to fundamentalists on this plane, they have never gotten angry. Ever. They've always finished the conversation far more friendly to me than when it began. Because I tried. I spoke to them in their terms. And I broadened their horizons in their terms. And so if you deny that your need to, in some degree, minister to the natives, if you're going to be moving in this direction.
There's an organization called Rebellious Truth, which operates out of Orange County, but they're nationwide. And what they do is they bring people together deliberately who are at opposite poles politically or whatever, and they have moderators and they engage them in a discussion. And amazingly, they come out of these discussions with a solid base of agreement that they never recognized they had. And the hostility is largely dissipated. They're actually talking to each other. Now I've noticed for many years that fandom takes a different approach, what I sometimes think of as the Mensa approach, which is to take every slight flaw in an argument and jump on that and make that the whole core, instead of figuring out, how do I make this guy's talk right? I mean, how do I take what he's saying and make it into something that is closer to the truth by helping him or her with it, rather than by jumping on them and then taking over the whole conversation?
I don't know if that's going to lead to the singularity, but it's going to keep you from being burned at the stake.
I've had arguments with climate scientists who had some mistaken thoughts about black carbon in the stratosphere versus suborbital rockets. And trying to discuss what we agreed on was a heck of a lot easier than saying, "You're wrong!"
Yes, indeed. So, come on, you must have thought of some questions or fetchings about the singularity.
I'll raise my hand.
Well, Adam here is going to be one of the leaders of the H+ conference. I'm going to be
speaking
on it by Skype, but the H+ conference stands for Humanity Plus.
So I'll just say, just in reference to this, it's on in December 1st and 2nd. It's in San Francisco. Ken Stanley Robinson will be there, and he'll be speaking about transhumanism or about utopias as well. So that'll be fantastic. But my question is...
It's going to be near San Francisco from the perspective of an Australian.
It's at San Francisco State University.
The West Coast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that's in San Francisco.
I guess so. I'm imagining it is somewhere near San Francisco. So the question is, what has been the most convincing arguments against the singularity? Against it, well, either it being implausible or it being stopped. We already know about nuclear war, but what other reasons would you suggest or put forward would be the most likely reasons a singularity wouldn't happen?
Well, Fermi's paradox is a big one. I think we're all probably familiar with it. The angle of it that I came across recently that really raised it for me anew was, never mind where are they in space, where are they on Earth? 500 million years have gone by, and so far there's one intelligent species we've found. It has lasted a small fraction of the amount of time that most species exist, and it seems to be on the verge of killing itself for the past century. So you put that together, it just leads to the idea that intelligence itself, let alone superhuman artificial intelligence, is a negative survival trait. Additionally, economically, the stock trading argument notwithstanding, I can't really see an argument for creating artificial intelligence. The problem with the machines that we create are servants. The problem with intelligent servants is they will eventually decide they don't want to serve you.
Except for dinner.
Yeah. So that's my take on it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that along similar lines. From the perspective of a consumer, you don't want an artificial intelligence that's self-aware. You just want clever programming to make it look like that for whatever your needs are. Otherwise, you've got a
Half the
slave.
engineers, you know.
Well, there's the Kurzweil argument, though, and I'd like, Vernor, I really would like you to comment on the differences between you and Kurzweil as soon as I finish my little statement. And Kurzweil has this idea, apparently, that we can make the universe intelligent. That all of this conflict that goes on in the normal evolutionary process of which we're the products, all of the wasted energy and selection processes could be bypassed to a large extent if everything that we dealt with, whether a table or a camera or our own bodies internally, the control of our own minds, all these different aspects of our existence could themselves be imbued with intelligence to a certain degree at least. And instead of having the evolutionary conflict model that results in tapeworms just as often as human beings. Tapeworms were once free living. Instead of having that model of things, what if we had a directed evolution that would be closer to something on the Hindu model, in which the universe is being recreated continuously as a test bed for new ideas and new concepts and new designs, etc., but not in a conflictive manner except where necessary to test how accurate our knowledge is in that realm.
I think the differences between Ray's position and mine, standing from the outside, certainly are very small. I think I am less certain about things, and I am less anthropocentric. But I think those are the two biggest differences.
What do you think about his intelligent universe idea?
I don't know. First of all, I don't know because I haven't read the details on that. And secondly, if I interpolate what it might mean, because that's an idea that is the term is very evocative. If I interpolate from that evocation, it's something that I would have a lot of enthusiasm for. It's not necessarily clear that it's valid, but it certainly is a very optimistic, very positive way of looking at it. I think that the Fermi Paradox is the space-like analog of the uncertainty we have about our near future, and that so I don't necessarily say that proves anything one way or the other, but it proves that these are really sort of the same sorts of things, and it is a very deep sort of a question of practical questions. It may be the deepest practical question that can be asked, and it's very strange to be perhaps a few decades away from actually having an answer to a question that is of cosmic significance.
Well, Mitch, you're involved in comedy to some degree, right?
I'm a technology journalist, so
well, I
guess that's kind of the same thing.
I thought you did some funny things too.
On occasion, not on purpose, but.
I see. I was wondering if you had a comedic aspect to the singularity you could share with us.
Well, just the idea that the intelligent universe. If this table is going to become intelligent, it's just going to decide it might be happier at a different panel entirely.
Or it might suggest reorganizing the panel.
Yes. Well, then we find out that all these years we've been cutting out all these cancers that are trying to tell us, about the new methods.
Jonathan.
Vernor, you said something very acute I wanted to get you to follow up, which is you said a scientist can do good research on something which is not yet defined. When someone said, what is thinking? And if you ask, what is intelligence at an AI conference, they were very
I wasn't that specific, but
I mean, the example that I'm interested in your answering is that Crick, after he and Watson invented the double helix structure of DNA, spent the next 25 years trying to do experiments with consciousness, especially with Christoph Koch at Caltech.
Yes.
And their position was, we can't define consciousness yet, but if we do good experiments, in some emergent way, we will develop the vocabulary. Do you basically agree with that?
Yes.
You, sir, had a question.
Yes. Do any of you gentlemen have a comment with respect to the economist Robin Hanson's suggestion that highly inexpensive artificial intelligence could drive down wage levels to the survival level?
Well, we all know Robin. Robin is one of the wonderful, wonderful, cheerful grouches in the field, and he has done economic analysis of unlimited reproduction of virtual entities in a capacious but limited computational space.
And David Brin has written a book that explores one parameterization of that in extraordinary detail.
And what is
killing
that?
people?
Oh yes. Well, that's killing people is where you can make copies of yourself in this physical world, and that's loads of fun. And you can take home a signed card for it.
But it's not 3D.
Right. But Robin Hanson's notion is, what if we can download ourselves in or create intelligent entities inside computers, and they start out with a capacious space. Well, what's going to happen is they're going to start doing reproduction, either by mitosis and splitting or sexual reproduction or anything like that, probably sexual, because then they'll gain new techniques. And the result will be Malthus, because the things that slow down Malthus in this world won't slow him down in the modeled world. And so you'll get a runaway, competitive environment of virtual slave labor down in there, struggling for any allocation of resources from the gods, who will be us. Unless, of course, we're all ready.
Wait a minute. What about the possibility that these essential single-celled organisms decide to form multi-celled organisms? In other words, coalesce. Why
one thing about Hanson's situation is that he sticks to the level of human equivalent intelligence.
All right.
Yeah. So your question is, I think, valid, but it doesn't come up for him.
Which brings
at least
us,
in the talks I've heard.
Well,
which brings us back around to my short story, Stonus of Significance, which I think you'll enjoy.
Even with human level intelligence, why would
that was a plug? It's free.
Why would we not be able to coalesce? In other words, if you made a copy of yourself 2 seconds ago, and then you decided, oh no, I don't have enough energy to support this or enough computational space, so you remerge, you become one person again. What if it was 10 minutes ago, or 10 hours ago, or 10 years ago, but you decided that you would be better off merging with your virtual progeny in order to acquire the additional knowledge, skills, whatever, but also simply to save space and energy.
This is why we have not been contacted. They're lurking and they're just listening in on these conversations that we have, and they're saying, man, you humans, you are a trip. we may be able to travel between the stars, but man, let's grab that Osborn guy. In fact, we already dragged him up here a few times, didn't we?
The godlike AIs are looking at us and saying, any species that canceled Firefly after only 12 episodes, we don't want to have anything to do with them.
And don't forget Data's comments in Star Trek.
What did he say?
What?
Well, Data was making comments all through the series on his interactions with humans. And sometimes they hit on some good ones.
Good show. And I'm sorry David Gerald wasn't here today. He was here yesterday.
Very sick.
Yeah, he invented Data.
Yes.
Your own, LA's own David Gerald. Yeah.
About Hanson's, models where it ends up being completely crowded. You don't necessarily see that in human populations. Is that look at Europe and Japan, where people look at they take an estimate of what
the biggest
future
reason we
economics
haven't
will look
had
like
Malthus,
and decide not to have so many people.
the biggest salvation for our chances. We're supposed to stop. The biggest salvation for humanity is we have a window of time during which there is a simple solution to Malthus among humanity, and that is to give girls full, at least high school education and rights. If they become women who have control over their own bodies and their destinies, they choose to have 2 kids. give or take one or two. However, this is also perhaps a fluke of humanity, because we have the compulsive thing, which is sex, which all through the animal kingdom is directly correlatable with reproduction. And for a window of time, we are able to separate the thing that we are compelled to think about and do from something that's volitional.
I'm being dragged away here.
Everybody, the singularity has decided it wants its dad. And with that, perhaps we'll allow you to take your leave of our senses. Oh, if you want signed cards for killing people or existence, come on up.
So as you saw, there was a Humanity Plus at